Our passage of Scripture again is Numbers 16, 1 through 50. And that is a long passage. The book that we follow outlined this study in the following way. The cost of rebellion. Rebellion is often rooted in discontent. Verses 1 through 15. Rebellion often spreads, as do its consequences. Verses 16 through 35. Rebellion, and I added, against God is always unwise. Verses 36 through 50. And just for an aside note, if you're using a Hebrew Bible or a Jewish translation, that is verses 1 through 15 of chapter 17. They divide it a little bit differently. Talk a little bit about this book that we are looking at. In English, it is called Numbers. It is called Numbers because it follows the Greek Old Testament, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that named it Numbers because of the census at the beginning and the census at the end. The Jews gave it another name that translates in the wilderness, in the desert. That name's appropriate too, because all of the events in the book of Numbers happened in the wilderness. They happened in the wilderness. We don't know when the events of Numbers chapter 16 occurred. They may have occurred right after chapter 14. They may not have occurred right after chapter 14. Let's back up and think a little bit about what happened in Numbers 13 and 14. They are at Kadesh. They, meaning the Israelites. They're at a position that they can go into the promised land. The conquest can begin, if you will. But they refuse to go. They refuse to go. You can say that 10 spies brought a bad report back. But still, it was a refusal to go into the land. It was a refusal of faith to trust God that He would give them the land as He promised. So they refused to go. And as a result, they were told, you're going to wander in this wilderness 1 year for every day that the spies were in that land. So they are in the wilderness. Chapter 15 is an interesting chapter because it's basically a renewal of the covenant. God cursed them in the 14th chapter. But in the 15th chapter, He tells them, although this has happened, you're still my people. You're still my people. I still want you. I still want you. And the events of chapter 16, as the literary arrangement of the book of Numbers, seems to grow out of the end part of chapter 15. Chapter 15, verses 39 through 40 specifically. There's a command there that they are to put tassels or fringe at the corners of their garments. This fringe or this tassel is to remind them of something. It is to remind them that they are to remember the commandments of the Lord and to do them. It's a reminder that they're not to follow the lust of your own heart and eyes. You shall be holy to the Lord. You shall be holy to the Lord. Now, on a side note, when the woman comes to touch Jesus to be healed, what does she say she's touching? Or what does the text say that they're touching? The hem of his garment. It's most likely this fringe are these tassels that are hanging from the corners of his garment that she is coming to touch. Also in Matthew 23, verse 5, when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and he's telling them that they've enlarged their tassels or their garments, the hem of their garments. Again, we're talking about this. And, that's unimportant for this lesson, but it's an aside. Also note Exodus 19, verse 6. Exodus 19, verse 6. That tells Israel that they are a special people to God. They're to be holy unto the Lord. So, Korah, the main leader of this rebellion, uses this idea: we're all holy. We're all chosen by the Lord. And it sounds so good. We're all chosen by the Lord. We don't need special leaders. We don't need specifically a special priest. The rebellion in this chapter has at least two elements. The element is the priesthood. Aaron is the priest. The second one is one that's been going on for a long time in the book of Numbers. Nobody's content with Moses. Nobody is happy with Moses. His brother and sister weren't happy with him. The people weren't happy with him. The rabble wasn't happy with him. They weren't happy with anything that he did. So that's another faction or element of the rebellion. There are, I guess I can put it this way, there are three participants in the rebellion. There is Korah, who seems to be the main leader. There's Dathan and Abiram and On, who are Reubenites. Now, Korah's idea is for the religious reasons. I don't like Aaron. I don't like the prerogatives that Aaron has. Dathan and Abiram, On drops out for some reason. He's never mentioned again after the first verse there. Their reasoning is Moses hasn't led us into the promised land. He hasn't taken us into a land of milk and honey. Why not? He's brought us out here to kill us. They conveniently forgot. Oh, and by the way, he took us out of the land of milk and honey. So, they've shaded the story just a bit. Moses brought them out of a land of slavery. It might have had milk and honey, but they were still slaves. They conveniently forget chapters 13 and 14. Their refusal to go in to the land of milk and honey. So, that's their component. Now, there was enough. Korah apparently was a pretty good leader. He got 250 others to join in this rebellion against Moses and Aaron. Probably. Notice I said probably. This 250 are mostly Levites. Mostly Levites. Numbers 27 verse 3 will tell us that others were involved. And what I mean by others, from other tribes were involved. Not just Levites and Reubenites. Now there's a good reason why the Reubenites and the Kohathites were the main instigators in this rebellion. If you look at the arrangement of the camp from chapters 2 and chapters 3, the Kohathites camped on the south side of the tabernacle. The Reubenites also camped on the south side of the tabernacle. So you remember that the Levites were to insulate the tabernacle from the rest of the camp. So here you have the group of Kohathites. Then next to them you have the Reubenites. As I said, the two components, desire for the priesthood and its prerogatives, and we see that from how Moses responds in verse 7, that this was his take on what he saw as the rebellion of Korah. Sorry about that. Now let's think a little bit about who we're talking about in this fellow Korah. If we look at Exodus 6, verse 18. We see that Kohath had 4 sons. Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. Amram was the father of who? I heard it. Moses and Aaron and Miriam. So Izhar had a son named Korah. So potentially, as the story is set up, Korah is the first cousin of Moses and Aaron. There's another piece in this story that's not mentioned here, but it's mentioned in chapter 3. Uziel, and I'm sure I'm butchering that name, has a son named Elizaphan. Elizaphan is chosen as the leader of the Kohathites. So Korah may be feeling just a little bit slighted. My cousins Moses and Aaron, chosen to be leaders of the tribe, of the nation. Aaron's chosen as high priest. Moses was chosen as leader. My other cousin, he was chosen leader of the clan. So, potentially, maybe that's the discontent. And that's the way that a Jewish midrash presents the story, is he was not happy with the business of the blue tassels, and everybody was holy, and his cousin was chosen as the leader of the clan. What did Korah forget? Now remember who he is. He is a Kohathite. What were the responsibilities of the Kohathites? They took care of the holy furniture. They took care of the holy furniture. They didn't get to look at it. But on the journey, they carried it. They were responsible for it. They were responsible for the protection of the Ark of the Covenant. They were responsible for the table. They were responsible for the altar of incense. They were responsible for the menorah, the golden candle, the golden lampstand. These were privileged in a way that other Levites did not have. You know, the others, they carried frames and had wagons, and they had to take all this stuff down, assemble it. These guys just carried the holy furniture. Okay, enough of that. So, we've talked about Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth. And why does On drop out? He's never mentioned again. I don't know. Maybe he decides, hey, this is not going to go well. Maybe he repents of his initial participation in it. We just don't know. Then the 250 leaders we've already talked about. So do you suppose Korah wanted the priesthood? Was it because that he saw what priests were like in Egypt? That they were fairly wealthy? Perhaps. We don't know that. Maybe it was just cousins having a disagreement over the inheritance, if you will. Notice that in dealing with this rebellion, Moses proposes a priestly test. You want to be priest. Let's do a priestly task. Offers incense before God. This applies to the 250 and seems to involve Korah. And in my head, at least, notice I said in my head, it seems like when Moses makes this proposal, that Dathan and Abiram want no part of it. And there might be a good reason. They might have remembered Leviticus 10, where Nadab and Abihu brought strange fire before the Lord, and they were burned to death. That may or may not be the case, but it may just simply mean that, hey, we'll let Korah and his group be priests, and we want to be the leaders. So they said, no, we're not coming up there. We're not coming to you. We will not come. We will not be commanded by you. Verse 19, the Lord appears. And this is one of those situations in which the Lord appears and he's speaking at least to Aaron and Moses. Get away from them. I'm going to destroy them. Now, is the voice audible to the congregation? We don't know that. We don't know one way or the other. But if it is, people would have reason to be feared. But who pleads for them?
Moses and Aaron.
Yeah. Moses and Aaron intercede. Isn't it ironic that the ones that are being rebelled against, the ones that are being accused of destroying the congregation, are the ones that are pleading for God not to destroy it? They're actually the ones wanting to save it. So the next part in the story is that the 250 who have brought the incense and the fire are consumed by the fire. Well, they're killed by the fire. Let me back that up just a bit. Dathan, Abiram, and Korah's household are swallowed up by the earth. Now, I'd always read this story before, that Korah was swallowed up by the earth. He's probably burned to death because he was with the 250 offering incense. And maybe that's not an important point, but just something that was kind of curious to me. Later we're told that, with Dathan and Abiram, their whole household was destroyed. Korah's household was destroyed. Later we are told that Korah's sons survived. In the book of Psalms, in Numbers 26:11, we're told that his children survived. In the book of Psalms 42 through 49, the Psalms in that section are from the sons of Korah. And one of those psalm writers was a guy by the name of Heman, who appears to be Samuel's grandson. So, we may have a question here, a question of fairness. Was it fair that wives and children and slaves and animals were destroyed when the ground opened up and swallowed the households of Dathan, Abiram, and Korah? And we generally say, no, it wasn't fair. And we're correct. But sin has consequences. Sin has consequences not only for the one who commits it, us, but for those around us. So, in that sense, it's not fair that my sin has a potential of harming you. Are the consequences of my sin have a potential of harming you? Okay. So, and when we choose to sin, that leads others to follow. It's just causes people to get involved. So the censers are collected. They are used to cover the altar of burnt offering. They're made holy simply because they were presented before God, even though they were not authorized. The people that did this and the censers themselves come under that concept of being dedicated, or the ban is kind of the way I would put it. So they are totally dedicated to God. And they are to be used as that covering to remind the people of Israel when they come to sacrifice, it's not a wise idea to rebel against God. Now, we can't quite pull this all the way toward church. We talk about rebellion against church leaders. Why? Moses and Aaron were definitely appointed by God. Sometimes church leaders are not. They can claim, but sometimes they need to be brought back a step. Not necessarily rebellion style, but sometimes. Now, so let's move on. In chapter 16, verses 36 through 50, seems to be the following day, after the death of Dathan and Abiram, after the death of the 250, and they're at it again. Moses, Aaron, you caused this. You caused the death of these people. Now, God appears over the tabernacle, or His glory appears over the tabernacle. It seems to be that it's no longer the cloud at this point, but the Shekinah glory of God. And they, once again, under the threat of annihilation. 14,700 of them die in a plague. But then Aaron is to take a censer. Isn't it ironic that in the early part of the story, you take a censer and stand before God? Aaron and his censer and incense, he stands between the dead and the living and stops the plague. Stops the plague. The very people, once again. And these stories will go on through chapter 19 to vindicate the priesthood of Aaron. And that's the point. Again, the outline, rebellion often is rooted in discontent. Korah was discontent with what he had. Dathan and Abiram were discontent. Rebellion spreads. It spread from Korah, Dathan, Abiram, 250 leaders, to the whole congregation. And then there were consequences. Rebellion against God is always unwise. Okay, I'm done.